Hey guys, my name is Jonathan Stump, and I work with American Rivers here in the Puget Sound, Columbia River Basin. American Rivers is a national river conservation organization. We're headquartered in DC, but we have 11 priority basins across the country. I work in kind of the river protection side of things. Our organization likes to focus, kind of three areas that we focus on: clean water protections, river restoration, and river protection. So here in the Northwest, an example of some river restoration activities we're doing right now is on the middle fork of the Nooksack River. We're involved with the city of Bellingham and the tribes to remove the fish barrier at the diversion dam up there. And so we're hoping to be breaking ground on that next year, and that's going to open up about 20 miles of critical habitat for bull trout, steelhead, and spring chinook. So we're excited about that. I know it's been a project a long time in the making. Additionally, we work on river protections like Wild and Scenic River designations. We're involved with the larger campaign on the Olympic Peninsula. It's the Wild Olympics. It's a wilderness and wild and scenic rivers package that has about 19 rivers and maybe about 300,000 acres of wilderness. And let's see, then more locally here, I want to talk a little bit, and we'll let Brett do the lion's share of that, but talk about the Nooksack River Wild and Scenic campaign. And just real quickly, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was enacted by Congress 50 years ago on October 2nd, 1968, and essentially it offers legislative protections to free-flowing characters of rivers, so it kind of protects the natural, cultural, historical, recreational, fishery, geologic values of a river that are determined by the Forest Service in the planning session, or in the planning process. So here on the Nooksack River, we have an opportunity to designate 113 miles of the upper headwaters, and that includes 9 tributaries. I do have a map up there on the table that if you want to learn more about it and see kind of where the specific proposal is, please take a look at that. And kind of the heart of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, it really kind of safeguards kind of clean water protections, prohibits new dams. That's kind of like the big stop sign in that. And in the Nooksack Basin, that's kind of critical because since like the 70s, I believe, there's been about 40 or 50 hydropower proposals identified within the entire basin. And the Nooksack River is unique in Puget Sound as it's one of the few rivers in Puget Sound that doesn't have a dam or reservoir that supplies the municipality with drinking water. And then it also protects the lands alongside the river. So during the designation process, it essentially develops a quarter mile corridor along the river that protects the riverside lands. And then finally, the last piece of that, after the river's been designated, as directed by Congress, the Forest Service, or the managing agency, they have 3 years to complete a comprehensive river management plan, and that essentially brings together all the stakeholders, local, federal, community leaders, tribes, to sit down and figure out how to manage the river going forward based on the values that were identified in recreation, fisheries, things like that. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I'm going to turn it over here to Brett, who's been a big supporter of our campaign and getting the word out in the community through his great photography. And yeah.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you.
I just have a few words before we get started. So I'm presenting the Wild Nooksack to bring awareness to the campaign for protecting our river. Working with local and national groups, I hope to get the Nooksack included in the Wild and Scenic River system. The headwaters of the Nooksack River are free-flowing, beautiful, and wild. The Nooksack is critically important to all of Whatcom County, especially the Coast Salish Native American community, the native salmon runs, the orcas that we're all concerned about, and the health of the Salish Sea. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was created 50 years ago, as you mentioned, as many of the great rivers were being compromised by industry, development, and pollution. The goal of this act is to balance this reality with the protection of certain remaining wild and free-flowing rivers that have outstanding qualities. I believe the Nooksack is most worthy of this, and I hope to show you why. Our state's rivers are underrepresented compared to other western states. Oregon and California have between 2 and 3% of their rivers as wild and scenic, whereas Washington has just 0.3%. So American Rivers is spearheading the drive to protect the Nooksack as a wild and scenic river. And strong community support is important to encourage our senators to support this bill, because it will take an act of Congress. So I hope you consider signing the petition in support of a wild and scenic Nooksack River.
Yeah, and, real quickly, here is the petition. I'll pass it around. If you're interested in signing, please do so. Show your support for the river. When the time comes, we'll be delivering these petition signatures to the appropriate elected officials. So I'll just start passing that around.
Okay, so here is an overview of the Nooksack River coming into Bellingham Bay and the Salish Sea. The delta is just north of town here, and it comes in a few channels and changes with the season. Through the magic of evaporation and clouds, the waters were picked up and carried east over the North Cascade Mountains. This is Nooksack Cirque here, headwaters in the Nooksack. And it's dumped as snow and water on top of our North Cascades Peak. Here's Mount Baker, and creates these glaciers, which are really important to feeding the river all year long. It's Mount Shuxon in the North Cascades. This is the Price Glacier on Mount Shuxon, and it is the headwaters of the North Fork of the Nooksack. Here's Ruth Glacier in the North Cascades. It's a smaller glacier, but you can get a sense of scale with the three climbers there. So I've always been fascinated by glaciers. Essentially, they're a river of moving ice, and they're constantly changing. Both gravity's pulling them and melting, and they're also quite beautiful. This is the Deming Glacier on the south side of Mount Baker, and it feeds it's the headwaters of the Middle Fork Nooksack. Here's the terminus of the Coleman Glacier, which is the beginning of Glacier Creek, and that feeds into the North Fork of the Nooksack as well. So the snow is also quite important, winter snow, to feeding the river. And it's a beautiful time to go visit if you haven't done that. It's easy snowshoeing, skiing along the river, and it's really a quiet and peaceful time. Now on a good snow year, we get a lot of snow. Like this year, we were lucky to get a bunch of snow at the very end of the winter. But we really need the snow to feed the river. This is the canyon of the North Fork. It's surprising the different patterns and things you can see in the winter, even when there's not a lot of snow, just from the ice and the condensation coming off the river. It's really quite interesting to look around. These are kind of feathery shaped crystals that are about 3 or 4 inches tall, and it sounded like glass when you walked through this. So the forest that's along the banks really keeps it cool because it's in the shade quite a bit, and that's really important to the water temperature and the water quality. This is towards the very end of winter here. And when spring comes, it starts melting fast and changes pretty rapidly. Things start turning really green. Essentially, it's a temperate rainforest that we have along the Nooksack. It's very mossy and ferny. Here we're looking down on the river coming through the old growth forest. This is from Excelsior Pass, so we're looking a couple thousand feet down the river, and you can see it's got big forest all around it, and that really keeps it cool and also the water filtered. So the forest floor has a lot of biodiversity and beautiful plants. This is a Canadian dogwood. And here's the famed chanterelle, which is also quite a culinary delight if you've ever had one. There are hundreds of types of mushrooms. Because it's so wet, I guess. So it's totally raining a lot. Even when it's not raining, the moisture that comes off of the river around the banks keeps it green all year long. The forests here are really amazing. These are really tall, big, old-growth forests. And in spring, water starts coming out everywhere. It's really a big rush of water out of every little trickle, every little area that's dry in the summer. This is a waterfall along Wells Creek, which leads into the North Fork. But things that are just a little trickle really start becoming waterfalls. So another part of the Wild Scenic designation talks about recreation, and there's wonderful opportunities for river rafting. Paul out of Glacier, the town of Glacier, runs the Wild and Scenic River tours, and they're a really good company. It's really fun. I highly recommend it. There are 10 to 12 rules, and every one of them ends with just don't fall out of the boat. Whatever you do, do not fall out. So that's really the important thing you need to know. And you essentially wedge yourself into those little seats you see there. Your feet and legs, everything, you just wedge yourself in. But I guarantee you're going to get wet. It's going to be cold, and it's going to be fun. People also run it in kayaks, and this section, not in the inner tube, but kayaks and other boats. As far as recreation, there's a lot of wonderful trails in the area, and some are right along the river. Like here's the North Horseshoe Bend Trail, and it's really quite lush and a wonderful walk. You can get a mile and a half, 2 miles up in there. There's lots of places along the river to stop and take a break and just take it in. And this last year I had a chance to go up the Nooksack Surf, which is an amazing trail because it's not a trail anymore. The trail had washed out maybe 25 years ago, so it shows the trail on the map, but there is no trail. The first section is you cross a ford, and there's an old Forest Service road you walk up for about a mile, and then it empties out into the river where the trail used to be, and it shows it on the map, but from that point on, you're essentially walking on rocks another 4 or 5 miles up into the surf. So this picture was made about 20 years ago when I was up there. And this is Icy Peak, the head of the cirque. And if you notice, the glacier is about halfway down the rocks. So we went up there this last year, and this is the glacier that's remaining on Icy Peak. So it's shrunk about half in size, maybe a little more. It's a little sad, but we are definitely witnessing our glaciers shrinking every year. It's a classic U-shaped valley. So an old glacier carved through this, and you can see that U shape right there. It is a very deep canyon that you walk up into. And this is the trail. You just walk on the rocks by the river. And so it was a little bit hard walking. This is Mount Huxley at the head of the cirque. There's a lot of river crossings involved in this, or stream crossings along the way. I think we had to cross about 20 times, and it took us about 8 hours to go 4 miles. So it's real slow going. But you can see the glacier on Mount Huxley there, and that really is the beginning of the North Fork of the Nooksack River. When we made it all the way up to the top of the cirque, this is what we saw. There's the glacier, and there's just a couple of waterfalls you see here coming off that are the headwaters of the Nooksack. And you can see how the glacier has carved that landscape, and it's all melted back at this point. It's really steep walled canyon. It's, a lot of books refer to it as the deepest, darkest hole in the North Cascades. And we had a good starry night out. That's always fun. Get away from the city out there and you see a lot of stars. So another trail is Hannigan Pass. It's a very popular trail. And this is Mount Luke that we were talking about earlier, and Root Creek that flows into the North Fork as well. Some of these trails lead you up close enough to the glacier that you can walk right up and touch the glaciers. So that's pretty fun. This is the Heliotrope Ridge Trail. It's where the climbers go to climb the north side of Mount Baker. The climbers camp is very near here, and you can get right up to the glacier on this trail. It's a really fun trail to go on, and you just hear water rushing constantly in the summer. So your water, and later in the summer, with the amount of wildflowers we have, there's a lot of bees and flies too, so that's also really nice. The flower fields are amazing. Looking from the high country down into the river basin, you can see a lot of activity there, multiple use, including some clear cuts up away from the river. So here's what a clear cut looks like when you're in it, and it really destroys a lot of habitat. And one of the points of this designation of a wild and scenic river is it leaves a 200-foot buffer on each side of the riparian zone, they call it, to maintain the trees and the vegetation, because that really filters out the water and keeps it clean and cool and clear. So we'd much rather see this right on the banks of the river. And it really does shade the river. A lot of the river never sees much sunlight at all. force along the banks really help keep the water cool and clear like this. I've noticed the different colors in the water at different times of year and different times of day. Now, part of this is from the silt coming off the glaciers and the side of the river banks. The glacial silt, it's kind of like a powder, and sometimes it's green, like this, and other times it's a little bluer, so I mostly call it aquamarine. This is Nooksack Falls, a little side trip off the Mount Baker Highway. It's just a little road goes down there and to an overlook. And you can't really get to the bottom of the falls. It's pretty fenced off because it's super steep around there. So this is the Nooksack River coming over the falls and Wells Creek coming in on the right-hand side there to join it. It is loud. You can feel the ground shake. So it's pretty fun. Again, even on a sunny day, it can be really misty and mysterious. This is Ruth Creek coming in towards the Nooksack Cirque Trailhead, and it looks so clear and clean and inviting like Hawaii, but honestly, it is freezing cold. It just looked like the perfect place to swim, but it wasn't. It comes out of a pretty deep canyon. It keeps it really cool. I also really enjoy the patterns that the water makes, and it's fun to play with photography with the time exposures and that to emphasize the different patterns. This looks like glass to me. And this is a sunset reflection, basically, off the water and the blue sky as well. That's not a salmon. A lot of people ask me that. It's not. Fall's a wonderful time to visit. Also, there's a lot of vine maples and maple trees along the banks, and it really adds some nice color. Here's Mount Baker behind Canyon Creek, and this is a, I guess they call it an engineered log jam, is that right? Or an engineered log structure? It's made for, its intention is to keep the river inside the banks when it gets really high, and also creates fish habitat behind the rapids. Here's Glacier Creek right near the Glacier Ranger Station, the two forks of Glacier Creek coming together right before they enter the North Fork. So up along Canyon Creek, I was fortunate to find some cougar prints. And I didn't see the cougar, but they're out there, so that's cool. I don't know if you can guess what made these prints and tracks. Right upstream, that is where the tracks led to, so I guess it was beaver. Here's a gray jay, otherwise known as a camp robber. And if you've ever been out eating lunch in the woods, you know these guys because they will steal your food so fast. Here's one of my favorite birds along the river. It's called an ouzel, otherwise known as an American dipper. And they do a lot of dipping, and they basically forage the bottom of the creek, and they can go in deep water, and they walk along the bottom, and they use their wings to kind of swim or fly underwater and propel them along. This is a baby asking the mom to feed it. And I sat here and watched these guys for a little while, and the mom would slip into that water and disappear and come up with food. And I watched that young one just fly and do a face plant right into that raging water and just come out with nothing. He just got back on the rock and started squawking until his mom brought him more food. He probably eventually figured it out. These are common mergansers, fishing. And here's the majestic bald eagle, of course. Now the eagle come in for the salmon runs, usually in January or so. And there's some really nice places to watch them along the North Fork. Looks like he's going to get something. So yeah, they come for the winter salmon feed. And they're very focused. Now the Nooksack is a really important river to our native Coast Salish peoples. And they really respect it, and they live by it, and it's an important part of their cultural and spiritual heritage. They're also really in tune as salmon people. The Nooksack is pretty unique in that it has all 5 native Pacific salmon. That's really special. A couple years back, there was an amazing, strong pink salmon run, and I got a chance to witness that. It's really fun. Pinks are also known as humpies because they have a big hump on their back. There was a lot of them. This group was right at the bottom of a small waterfall, and they were all gathering, getting ready to make the push over the fall. I wasn't scuba diving for this, I just held my camera underwater, and I couldn't see what I was taking pictures of, but I could see the salmon all around, so it was hit or miss, but I got a few good ones. So back on top of the water here, I just wanted to mention, like Jonathan did, that last year was the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and now's a really good time to push for the Nooksack to be included in this system, I believe. Here's a map with an overview of the proposed sections of the river that would be included. So the areas in blue, that are outlined in blue, on the top is the North Fork, the Middle Fork, and the South Fork down here. It's a little hard to make this out on screen, what we're talking about. We brought a map back here for you to look at to get a little more detailed information. But it includes not only the main forks, but some tributaries that come down, which are also very important to the system. And I'm showing this to just give more of a topography type overview as opposed to a flat map. So you can see there's Mount Baker, the Twin Sisters, and a whole lot of green hills with creeks and everything coming off of just about every canyon down into the main rivers. So the Nooksack is totally wild in the upper reaches and very scenic. This is Clearwater Creek. I got a chance to go to the Middle Fork this year and take a look at what it has to offer. There's a really interesting canyon called Icebox Canyon that's a little more than a mile long. It's really steep on each side. And the guy from the Whatcom Land Trust I was with said that he and a couple folks have run this section, but it looked pretty wild to me. I don't know how they did that. So the thing about the Middle Fork is right around this area, there was a diversion dam put in, I believe 70 years ago, about 70 years ago. And the purpose of it was to guarantee water to GP, the GP pulp mill down here. And GP used as much water as the whole rest of the city of Bellingham every day. And they got the water from this diversion into Lake Whatcom because they were draining Lake Whatcom like a few inches a day, so they needed to put some more water back in there. Well, GP is no longer here, and our mayor and our governor have signed off on removing this, and funding has been acquired to remove this. So this is going to be a great success when this happens. I believe it's going to be next summer now is the idea. And so you can see upstream from here is just in its wild state. It's a really nice area. And about half of the water is diverted off and it goes through a tunnel through the mountain down to Lake Whatcom. So the dilemma with this is 70 years ago they put this in, they were not thinking about fish ladders. And this is a cement berm that you see on the left here. And it's about 20 feet tall, so the salmon cannot jump that. And every year, for about 70 years, the salmon have been bumping up against this with nowhere to go. When this is removed and graded to a more natural grade, this will open up 16 plus miles of native salmon spawning habitat, and that's going to be a real success. Here you can see the diversion on the right is the channel where it starts into the tunnel and goes off to Lake Whatcom. And currently it's not in use, so the lake is not going to be losing anything. That was one question a lot of people have, is the lake going to need this water? But at this point, it's not being used and GP is not drawing off the water. So we're going to remove this whole thing and bring it back to its natural state and give the salmon a place to move upriver. It's a fantastic thing. There's a great group of people, individuals, groups, like American Rivers, companies like REI and other companies that are involved in this. And the lady in the pink shirt here is Suzanne Delbene. She's our local congresswoman, and she's very much for this idea. So here are folks looking at every little detail, every put in and corner of the river and discussing it. And a lot of effort and money has been spent to do restoration projects along the river. This is a Whatcom Land Trust property, Maple Creek Reach, and anyways, it's really amazing. The Whatcom Land Trust is buying property on the river. Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association is doing all this restoration, and so it's a big project, but they're really making some good progress on it, and it's really all about the salmon and keeping the water clean. So just as an overview, here's our Mount Baker with the glacier pouring off it, and on the far right out there you see the Salish Sea and Vancouver Island. And here's looking at from the delta back to Mount Baker, and that's how our river flows. So thank you for coming.